Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in on a beautiful Thursday afternoon. I'm in Prineville, Oregon, kind of a different destination spot for me today, but it is stunning here. Feels a little bit unseasonably warm. Hopefully you guys are doing well. Before we get started with my incredible guest today, I want to thank my sponsors at 5-Star Guitars. 5starguitars.com will share all sorts of opportunities for you too. Let me get this little link. I'll go in here. They've got repairs. They've got lessons. They've got the greatest deals on guitars. If you use the link 5starguitars.com/allaccesslive and use the promo code of allaccess15, you're going to save 15% off of everything you see there. Plus, there's no sales tax. They're based in Oregon, so you can save money by shopping local. You can also save 15% by using the All Access 15 link. So go to 5starguitars.com/allaccesslive. Let them know I sent you. They would appreciate it, and I will too. Now, let me just tell you before we get started, this next guest and I grew up together in elementary school first for a bit, a little junior high, lots of high school. Both of our parents were art teachers, and the last time I saw him was at a class reunion about 11 years ago. And the Yarrow Kraner that I got to meet at that point was such a changed man. I think we all are, but some of us have evolved more than others, and Yarrow is inspiring in so many ways. He started an organization called Hatch 18 years ago, and they have brought together some pretty remarkable people. He's since provided a lot of other cultural connections and visionary opportunities to change our planet for the better. And so I got Yarrow and my guest host, Ken Glenn, right here. So Yarrow, you're right here. Ken just ran away from for the camera, but I'm bringing it back on here. So thank you for being here, sir. How are you?
I'm so happy to be here to see both of you. Ken.
I think, as I mentioned, the only time that I saw you was briefly at a 20-year reunion. And I knew that you had done a lot of work in LA, doing some film and video. But man, it's amazing to see what you've done since. Now, between the podcasts and the TEDx talks and summit that I saw yesterday on sustainability, I feel like I just scratched the surface on Yarrow Kraner's life. But, you know, there were some formative moments, it sounds like, that have changed Yarrow. And I heard some of them on the podcast today. So maybe the people that are from Montana that knew Yarrow as a kid, you want to talk a little bit about what drove you to the place you're at right now and how it evolved to Hatch. Do you mind?
Sure. Well, I was raised by a single parent mom, only child. It was just pretty much her and I this whole growing up, and kind of, she left an abusive relationship with 25 cents in her pocket and put herself through her first college degree, and that was in Bozeman. And so she went to undergrad in Minneapolis and grad school in Bozeman. And so when I was growing up in Bozeman originally, I think by the time I got to like 4th, 5th grade, I was playing cello. I think by the time I was in 6th grade, I was like really into cello. And then I moved away and came back when I was a junior. And the reason why we moved away was because her first teaching job out of grad school was on the Rocky Boy Indian Reservation. And I was the only white kid in the whole school. And it was pretty brutal 2.5 years. But I ended up, getting a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. And after getting my ass kicked every day for a couple of years, started lifting weights. The cello was no longer. And I was, determined to be some sort of more of a jock, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember coming back as a junior at Helena High, or after going to Helena High, so a junior in Bozeman, and seeing a bunch of people that I hadn't seen since 6th grade and barely recognized anyone. And but that that moment, it was a real pretty seminal moment of moving away from the res, running into those kids a couple years later. I'd kept growing, they'd stopped growing. I just had this moment of like, wow, now was my time for kind of retribution. And then I just had this thousands of images, it's like kind of hundreds of years of hate. And it was like a moment of empathy and why they felt like that. And I like just asking myself the question of like, I was so angry. And then I started like walking toward them. And then as I'm walking toward them, I just asked myself, like, I wonder why they were so angry. And you just have this kind of realization that you can be another link in the chain for that sort of hatred, or break that link. And so I think that was a moment that I ended up really wanting to kind of seek out people on the fringes and the kind of quote unquote like others, because I always felt a little bit like an other, even though I'm like a white male. And the more we learn about that sort of privilege, the more we dig in deep on, historically systemic oppressive systems. And this last year and a half has even been double down on that journey, just through George Floyd's murder, and really wanting to lean in and fully immerse and kind of learn more about what it is that we can do to share our platforms and like use your power to share that power has been a mantra that I've been hearing a lot amongst some peer groups. But that moment is really one that kind of helped shape the idea of wanting to kind of find diversity and bring it together and build bridges. I don't think that it really fully settled in until later. Like, I had a moment in LA that was kind of like kicked off the second chapter of that sort of thought process. But that childhood moment was definitely one that was really powerful for me.
How about, the moment you mentioned in LA? I know that, you just touched on it, but what was that pivotal moment, do you think?
Well, growing up in what was then very small town Bozeman, Montana, like I think there's this kind of, when you grow up in a small place, you're always envisioning what's on the other side of that mountain.
Right.
And I couldn't wait to get out. And now when I go out, I can't wait to get back. But that moment of getting out was, I was convinced I was moving to the epicenter of creative genius, and I'd be inspired every day. And, I went to LA with just a real assumption and presumption that I was going to just have my socks knocked off, and we would take the town by storm. And we were there for a couple of years before I kind of realized that wasn't really the case, that I'm not going to meet inspiring people every single day. And I was at a Hollywood Hills party. I was looking around. Everyone looked the same. Everyone looked like they were just so beautiful and successful and dressed in black. And it was almost like a mono person. And I just walked outside and I stood next to the railing, and I just felt like I don't really belong here. And like, where are these people that were going to inspire me? And I'm thinking about this as I'm like looking up the stars, and I think I'm saying it inside my head, but suddenly there's this voice next to me. It's like, who? I'm like, what? Where is who? You said, where are they? I'm like, and then, who are you? And so I start talking to this gentleman, and he's a Czechoslovakian composer that was visiting there to teach deaf kids how to read and play music. And of course, all these question marks are like, how does that work? Like, can they feel the music? Is it just resonance? I mean, what's the whole reward feedback loop? I mean, are they just playing for the enjoyment of others? All these questions. And so we talked for hours on that. And then the next day, standing in line for coffee, I met the scientist that was on this team to piece the ozone layer back together. And I'm like, holy shit, is it working? You're like literally saving the world. And every day for the next couple of weeks, I just met these incredibly inspiring stories. And there was that kind of light bulb moment of, you ask the universe and the universe gives you the answer. And we so oftentimes forget just to ask that question, like, what is it that we're struggling with? I mean, some people might call that prayer, or some people might call that meditation, but it's all these different forms of asking the universe. And the reminder of just, asking, anyway, that series of interactions led to me starting a company called Superdudes, or the Hero Project. And it was really around finding and connecting real life superheroes so that they could accelerate each other, and also create a platform for role models that weren't only athletes and entertainers, but were educators and scientists and people in social impact. And we gamified a bunch of, getting people involved in their neighborhoods. How do you save the world? Start with where you are. That ended up growing to about 1.5 million people as network, 3 years before Facebook and MySpace, and that got acquired by Fox Studios. And then I came back to Bozeman to kind of figure out what was next, and realized that I still wanted to do that same work, was just go find exceptional humans and connect them together. And that was where Hatch was born.
I love it. there are a bunch of things that you mentioned right there that I feel like a lot of people, you talked about meditation and prayer. Some people that kind of forget to ask the universe. Seems like we get caught up in day-to-day mundane things, or trying to chase, bills, or family things that are so present right in front of us that we don't really look at how the entire perspective could be changed by just widening your view, right? And asking people. I mean, you talked about these experts that you talked to, first the Czechoslovakian conductor or composer, and then the scientist, people that were outside your circle, right? I mean, that part of it's getting outside your comfort zone, because a lot of people right now, especially in the pandemic, right, they're in their bubble and they've hung out behind a screen for a long time. The Zooms that they're part of are oftentimes part of their tribe. They're not actually asking questions. People outside their circle. And the thing that I found fascinating was, you went down to see how you could take the world by storm in LA. As one who has certainly done that in the entertainment industry, doing music, I found that the people that I really got inspiration from were not part of the industry at all, right? And it was also that you stopped seeking it. The purpose that you sought was different. Ken, I feel bad because I'm really talking over you right now, but I can relate to a lot of this. That when we were in Montana, and people that are watching this, if you're watching on anything other than YouTube, jump over to YouTube and subscribe, because I want you to be able to go back to the beginning of this and listen to Yarrow's formative time when we were in Montana, and we couldn't wait to get out of Montana. We had to hit the big city and to get all of the at that point, late 80s, early 90s, you're trying to get what's left of the sort of industry entertainment pie. But we took a lot of things for granted. I know I did, for sure. Every time I go back to Montana, I recognize the beauty that I missed out on before, because my perspective wasn't widened. When you go to LA now and it didn't feel like home to you, I can only go for a few days. I have wonderful friends there, and I'd love to go in for a few days and I'll play my show and maybe try to catch some grasp of something outside the norm there. But I the ocean, is what pulls me there. So I'll head up, the 101. But I know that when I was back in Montana, the people that I resonate with are not those normal, day-to-day Montanans that have kept their focus narrow. And I'm not trying to paint them into a picture of maybe close-mindedness, but I think every town probably has that circle. And what I love is that you found a way to introduce the idea of opening your mind without painting them into a corner. You haven't labeled someone that way, but you've offered maybe the vision of what that end result looks like. Saying, if you open your mind, how do you change the world? It starts with where you are, right? If you just look at a perspective a little bit differently, it seems to me that it's disarming, it's inspiring. It might light a candle or a light bulb in somebody that they hadn't thought about enriching their lives before, and consequently, it enriches the lives of everybody else. What I love is that you have shown that you can be a steward of this planet. You can leave this place better than when you got there, which is what a real Montanan ought to do, right? In their environment. But I think as global citizens, I think it's a really great place to start. So, Ken, having known Yarrow longer than I have, I think you guys spent a lot more time in school than I did. I know you and I talked about this a little bit. The Yarrow that's out there today, inspiring and changing the world, is a different Yarrow than was there when we were all younger. I think we probably all are. But did you have an idea that concepts like Hatch and Superdudes would be something that would have been drawn from Yarrow's imagination?
Well, Yarrow was always really creative. I mean, we're talking about, what was it, Yarrow, from second to fourth grade or something? Before you moved to was it Rocky Boy?
Yeah, second to sixth grade.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, for at least second through fourth grade, we're in classes together, running around, getting candy at Joe's Parkway, all this stuff. And I'd walk home with him, and his mom was just like this amazing, eccentric, awesome mom that would throw Halloween parties and bob for apples, all that stuff. But Yarrow was always creative, super creative, and I think he just got more creative as time went on. We used to sneak up to Did your mom work on campus at that time? I remember going up on campus to the art department and looking at paintings and ceramics and stuff.
Yeah, she worked. She was doing her master's degree, so she was working in the studio all the time at night. Because she worked like 3 jobs during the day, and so we would kind of roam the halls, and we made friends with a janitor named Cal who taught me how to play cribbage, and
Cool.
yeah, we were kind of like. I remember just standing like I do remember like walking the halls with you, looking at stuff and just thinking like, huh, that must be art. Like if you can't quite figure it out.
I know. Yeah, when you're in 2nd grade, it's like, well, it's probably just wallpaper to you, right? Because you grew up with it. But it is, yeah, it is kind of like, yeah, what is it at that point? Other than I love it because it's not, it's nuts and bolts school stuff, where you got to learn math or this or that. I think I was a pretty visual person to begin with too, but Yarrow definitely so, and had it in his blood, and so it was great hanging out with Yarrow and getting to go. I needed a friend back then. I felt, I moved here in 2nd grade, and I felt like an outcast myself. I mean, everybody else had friendships, and I'm just trying to make some friends, and Yarrow was there, and we just hit it off immediately, as I remember, and just had a great friendship. And then I think when we got to 5th grade, it's a melting pot, and you bring all the elementary schools together, and you kind of lose track a little bit, but always enjoyed that. And he definitely had that, some of that when he was younger too.
There had to be fire for sure.
Oh yeah.
I think, at that age, when you're trying to figure out your identity, that's a huge thing. I mean, your story about being there in the Rocky Boy Reservation, and, you're the only, like skinny, blonde, white, youth, feeling like an outcast, of course, right? I mean, it doesn't fit the common look there, and it's tough. I mean, you really have to find a way to acclimate, right? You either can acclimate and somehow make friends, or it's going to be a long, lonely time. The Superdudes concept really seems to be an offshoot of recognizing that at that age, you have to find an opportunity to see the superhero in yourself. I loved that idea. I know that you had like Shaquille O'Neal, I think, was one of your superhero characters that was sort of part of that, right?
Yeah, we were doing a stay in school program with him.
Yeah, and from what I remember, some of the ideas behind Superdudes was to provide them an opportunity to see the value of service and their community, right? So remember, you get the knowledge points when you sign up, and maybe you go out and volunteer at like an animal shelter, right? Or do some other community service type thing, where people can see the value of volunteering. And I know that you mentioned that Fox acquired that company, but it seems like the next evolution of that, what you've done with Hatch and how it's become global, is that you've taken everybody's superpowers, right? Everybody that you seem to have brought into the Hatch fold are these everyday superheroes in their field to accomplish the solutions to problems. There was a Netflix documentary, Inside Bill's Brain, about Bill Gates, and it seemed like there was kind of a similar process that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was doing a lot for education and trying to wipe out like the AIDS virus and go into different communities, maybe in like say Africa, where they needed to have clean water, and they had contests, right, where they'd have environmental scientists or young people coming together to invent solutions for clean water, and they'd have these contests, and then they'd bring the best of those ideas out to those areas and fund them and kind of follow them through to see if they could change the world in a positive way. And Hatch seems to be that way times 10. Everything that I've seen from the past is that, I think the way you put it was like, somebody comes up with a problem, just give me a problem, and then you'll have 20 experts in a way to look at that problem from different perspective. It's kind of like having a second set of eyes on something, but you've got 20 sets of eyes, and they happen to be perfection, or masters in their field, right? So making the whole greater than the sum of its parts, that seems to be a real idea behind Hatch. So you've got, and so I rather than me tell you what your organization is about, you want to kind of expand on that a little bit and tell me about some of the focuses behind Hatch's solution saving.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think there's one thing that you kind of pointed out right there, that at the beginning, is this kind of reframe or a perspective shift. I think that's something that at a really young age, like, we were super poor. My mom was working 3 jobs. We had homes that were bulldozed every, like 4 in a row for like 2.5 years. People were like donating back sheds for us to stay in. And like, I was constantly just like shifting the lens on that to make it feel like an adventure. And so it never really felt like, I never felt sorry for myself. I didn't honestly have the context that we would go, she would clean homes for like really wealthy people, and we'd show up and I'd be like, wow, this is what another home could look like. That blows my mind. But like, it was the perspective shift. And it's like when I had that moment with the kids from the reservation, just kind of the shift from having a chip on my shoulder to realizing I've been given a unique gift as a white male to be in that position, to feel what it's like to be a minority.
Yeah.
That was kind of that sort of lens shift continues to just play a significant role in my life. When I met these, the composer and the scientist in Los Angeles, it was like, holy shit, there's like real life superheroes everywhere. You got to shift your lens. Right. And then I start to formulate what that means to me. And then I'm like talking to someone that's bagging my groceries, and they just offhandedly mentioned that, they donate their Saturdays at a soup kitchen. I'm like, really? That's what you do with your spare time? I'm like file them into the superhero category. Who knew? I thought it was about these like really lofty people. And so with Hatch, it's been, again, like it's continued to evolve over the last like 17 and a half, 18 years. But the concept is really around cross-pollination of diverse perspectives. And if you have an area, like, let's say 6 people that are expert in something all staring at the same problem, you're going to get a kind of a 2D output of that challenge that's laden with like assumptions and blind spots and things they were taught, like whether it's, in engineering school or whatever it is, like you can't do this because of X, Y, and Z. But when you start layering in like a cellist and a game designer and all these really unique perspectives around this challenge, diversity of culture, age, domain, industry, that sort of roundtable, then you start to get this 3-dimensional output, this kind of a holographic output, as I like always visualize it, because then you start to see the acupuncture points for innovation, the blind spots, and when the blind spots are revealed, when you have someone in the room that's asking like, why can't we? And the first answer is like, well, because, actually, maybe we can. But if someone, if someone's not asking that question, we had a client that hired Hatch to curate a group of kind of innovators to come in and help them with something. And they're like, why is there a cellist in the room? It's like, well, music is math. This guy's a genius mathematician. And those are just like those slight little reframes. And so, the world has no shortage of challenges right now. The UN's created the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. You can go to sdg.org and learn more about those. There's 169 sub-targets under those. It's a language and framework that was devised to get leaders of countries around the world to agree on how they can systemically approach some of these things. And these challenges, even though some of them are like global and seem so lofty, they all trickle down to local. Sure. And so if we're working in our own backyard to solve for the things in our own communities, families, how do you save the world? Start with where you are has just kind of become a mantra of mine for the last 20 years. And, the thing that you were mentioning a moment ago with incentivization of the Hero Project, it was like we had to kind of lure them in with this promise of like, you could create a digital trading card with your face on it and the story you write, kind of immortalize yourself as this hero. So there's these aspirational heroes that kind of draw them in. The reveal is like, oh, you are one too. There's a hero in all of us. You have to tap it, define what that is, and then tap into it. And then the third part is like, well, now you need to go help others do the same, and then, now go save the world. And so the save the world part started with these casual games, like you could go play these games, you got these points that would accrue, and but there was kind of a bait and switch there. It's like, that's where you get that prompt. How do you save the world? Start with where you are, type in your zip code, and you're given 10 things you can do within a 3-mile radius of where you live to go park reclamations, donate time to the local soup kitchen or humane society, and then they would get 10,000 knowledge nuggets. and a light bulb would go off and be like, I could play video games for a month and not, receive that sort of incentive. And there were prizes associated with those, so people were kind of driven to go get more. But suddenly we were driving people out into their communities and getting letters back from parents and teachers, and there was a lot of really cool, unexpected things that occurred from that.
At that time, I mean, the idea of self-esteem building is so key, right? When at that age, the key, at least the target age that you had for Superdudes, and the age that you were at when you were in Rocky Boy, you're trying to develop not only the identity, but also your self-worth is taking a hit everywhere. You're sort of feeling less than everybody that you look at, and it's a common thing for everybody. To be able to have served, to be able to provide service and value to your community certainly builds self-worth. So the finding the superhero in yourself also is a great way for them to develop confidence, and it's easier to save the world when you feel a little bit better about what you're doing and about yourself, right?
And also recognizing that you don't have all of the superpowers. Like
right.
that was part of the messaging for us was like, yeah, you're born super. Congratulations, you finally figured that out. Now you have an obligation to go help other people figure out that they're super, and you got to go find other people whose strengths align with your weaknesses. So let's start talking about what those weaknesses are. That exercise in vulnerability and humility of just like, we can't have like 6 corkscrews on a Swiss Army knife. You need to have different people that have different skill sets and whose strengths can align with your weaknesses. Like, because only you can defeat you. Your nemesis is so powerful, right? Like your ego can essentially blind you. And sure. So, keeping a sense of humor about those was really part of the lesson there of, for myself, it's like, I have this power of the dream. I can like visualize things. I can manifest things into reality, not just for me, but for others too. I can like problem solve with someone about what they're trying to do and then help them kind of coalesce a vision around it. But, super short attention span, ADD. And then what I wrote into the character was like the ADD would like lead to narcolepsy, and then he would knock his synapse, the character, out. And then he couldn't focus the dream. And so his nemesis was chaos, and which it still is. Like every single day it haunts me.
Yeah.
And the people I work with. So,
recognizing that is a huge key thing too, right? Because like you can, when you start to see it pop up, you can, you can temper your chaos a little bit, and your adversary. The problem solving piece of this and finding the solution, different tools for the corkscrew. I love the corkscrew analogy, by the way. I think that's a good one. Something that's really important to me that I worked in for quite a while in Portland was the homeless epidemic that's been plaguing every major city, every city really on the planet. I know that people in our community in Portland have gotten pretty used to publicly critiquing, say, the state government. Our governor might shut things down and may allow, for homeless camps to be allowed in certain areas. So everybody will point at a particular local politician without recognizing that every city is dealing with that same kind of thing. And rather than sort of pointing fingers and saying whose fault it is, or making assumptions about why people are there. Because we certainly hear a lot of that too, right? People making assumptions about why somebody's out on the street. Oh, they must be, lazy and not wanting to work, or maybe they've got addiction issues and they have their own judgments about that. When in actuality, the economic disparity is so difficult, right? For so many places, cost of living, places like Bozeman or Portland are prohibitive for people, and during COVID, especially, people are losing their homes. So it's a problem that it was close to my heart. Wanted to do something about it at a really small level. My son was very involved, and he saw these kids in Portland that were shoeless, and he was making fun of them. At first, he's like, Dad, why would these kids be running around without shoes? He was 12 at the time, and they were about his same age, and they were running around in the rain downtown Portland. I said, it's because they don't have any. And he couldn't fathom that thought. He said, well, we've got shoes at home. Let's go get some shoes. And so we started doing that Wednesday, early release. We go downtown, we bring coats, and the more that I started promoting that locally, saying, hey, can we get some shoes? And we got deals with REI to give us sleeping bags and tents. Then an old classmate of ours, Kelly Birdall, who's now the music teacher at our old high school, said, hey, I saw the thing you were asking about this coat drive. I take my students out every spring break to go hunt Bigfoot. But on the way, we go to LA and we feed homeless in the soup kitchens. I would love to be a part of your homeless outreach in Portland. That way I can take my kids out. We'll look for Bigfoot in Oregon, and we'll see if we can't help the homeless there. He brought 70 kids out with 2 buses. They brought a whole bus full of their instruments because we wanted them to be able to perform. And music became part of that outreach, compassion through music. And what I had asked these kids to do after recognizing that that was an issue was to talk to these people, to get the perspective from where they're at, what brought them there on the streets, and find that rather than having their own opinion or their own assumption, really find out who that person is. I know that opened eyes to these kids for sure. And it was amazing to see, just by kind of asking the universe for some help, Kelly could bring all these students where 70 kids might have a different perspective about the homeless epidemic, and they saw that you could do something about it. Now, it's a huge deal. We didn't solve the homeless epidemic in Portland or anywhere else, but I think that getting other Swiss Army knife tools, to put together at least made an impact. I'm wondering if you found those kinds of situations where it seems, as you said, something seemed global and lofty, like there's no way that we can solve all that, in a weekend. But starting local certainly is a way. How would you say that communities like, say, Bozeman? I know that Bozeman has homeless that I never would have imagined before, right? People think of Bozeman, the Tony little, affluent ski town, has homeless there. I mean, it's impossible to find, housing or work, to be able to sustain yourself unless you were there and you set up for a while. So how do you have any recommendations on how somebody might be able to get involved in an organization like Hatch and affect their community locally? I know we've got hatchexperience.org down below, but do you have people that say, hey, I want to be part of something. I want to be a superhero as a contributor to my community. Can they do something like that through Hatch?
Well, there's a few different things that come to mind as you're telling me that story. First of all, it's beautiful what your son and you were doing. Is your son named Caleb?
Nolan is my youngest. He's 19, and he's the one that started that. Oh, Caleb's here in the chat. Yeah, he's also very involved.
I saw another rank in there.
Yeah,
But there's a friend of mine who's very active in fighting homelessness, and it started in the east side of Vancouver, his journey particularly, which is the largest open air drug market in North America.
Hastings Street.
And so there's just a ton of drug use there, but he thought he had a pretty specific view on what homelessness was, and he ended up getting a fellowship to Stanford and engaged a bunch of PhDs to do some research and so forth. And as it turns out, the data they got back was that about 80% of America is one paycheck away from being homeless, meaning that if suddenly tomorrow, without warning, your paychecks stopped, and you'd have about a 2-month, maybe a runway or a 3-month runway, but we're all very close to pay our bills and just be homeless. And COVID has exacerbated that. We've seen the chasm of inequities, and a lot of people have, obviously they've put a moratorium on, or at least Biden's, administration has prevented a lot of evictions and so forth. But Mark's solution was to create something called PAL, which is Positive Access Link, which is a token. And if I could drop, is there a way to drop stuff in here? The chat?
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, if you want to, down at the lower right, you can type a message in there. I love that you've got resources galore. You're wonderful about doing this. What it'll do is it will post this chat, I believe, on the Twitch and YouTube channels. Facebook's a little touchy about having that to aggregate out into that.
I don't really see an option. Well, I'll tell you the story.
Okay. And there's a private chat too. If you want to put the link there, I can paste it in so people can see.
Sure. So awesome. There's a little video piece that we did. It's very short and it's kind of snappy, but
that's actually going right to the Vimeo homepage too. Do you
What's that?
That link is just going to the Vimeo homepage. Do you have another?
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
try it again here. So anyway, Mark Brand did this research, which was super powerful, because it's a reframe, right? It's a reframe on what does it actually mean to be homeless. And so he's engaged a bunch of people like artists and, oops.
Sorry, I'm making you multitask here, but the reframing, like, so Mark's been able to paint a different picture on people's perspective on what homelessness is about.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, there it is. Sorry about that.
No, I appreciate this. Thank you. We've got a lot of old classmates here. Rob McLean says, hello from Butte, Yarrow Kraner.
Hey, Rob.
And Mike Parsons. Good to see you guys here.
Awesome.
All right. Sorry.
Hey, Mike.
So, gentlemen, I'm pasting this link in here from Yarrow. Hit this on Vimeo. And I'm saving that one for myself as well.
And so I have a ton of respect for Mark and the work that he's been doing, and it continues to evolve. He's worked. There's I think 95% of homeless people actually have smartphones, and that was part of an initiative that Obama created a long time ago. So
Right.
they'll have ways to. And Mark's vision now is for a homeless person to be able to type in some data. It's like, hey, I'm a single parent mother that's homeless, so they'll send you to a nearby shelter that's the friendliest for women or drug addicts or someone going through withdrawal. Like you can add like different layers of filtration, and we've since been working on separately from this program, but in hopes that we can collaborate together. I launched a company called H360.ai about 3.5 years ago, and it's an AI machine learning matchmaking platform that's been in beta for a year now, that connects needs and solutions, people to projects. So you can go, you're part of a community or an organization, and you fill out a profile, you type in the causes that are important to you, and then the AI and machine learning will just go and start matching people to the causes of their interest. And so we're going to open that up to the public probably within the next like 6 months. But then there's the ability to say, I want to get involved in homelessness. I don't care where it is. Like I'm a programmer, or I'm a composer, or I have time to give, I have skills or talent to give, or I want to get involved with homelessness, and let me add my zip code, and then you can get a little bit more geolocation and start to connect with people in your community. And obviously there's, in the meantime, there's Google. So you can, if you're truly interested in wanting to get involved in a cause, type in your community and go donate, 6 hours on a Saturday somewhere.
For somebody that's got a lot of initiative, it's great. I mean, you can go to a local food bank, or you can look at, like, say, a local community page on Facebook and say, I'm new to the area, I want to volunteer. Those people have some initiative and they're out there, but some of it's daunting, right? If you think, I know that I have I've got some compassion, I want to be able to help somebody out, I don't know where to start. I mean, I can Google search and I can see that there's a homeless problem in Bozeman, but I might find some resources, but I think it's hard to find the other tools and for the Swiss Army knife, And I love the idea of 360 being able to bring these people together in this sort of synergistic way, especially if there's a database and you can drop, geolocate and drop your zip code in there. It's great if it can pair you up and match make.
The challenge that's happening right now, even with people that are actively working in social impact issues, is a lot of it happens in silos. So you have a ton of replication of work with a total inefficiency of resources being used. And so the goal for this platform that we're building is to work with the UN and power the backend of SDG.org, which is a database of like 800,000 SDG aligned projects, and then be able to start growing a visual of who's working in what space. And if you want to donate, time, talent, or money into a specific cause or area, you can see who's being effective at that. And you can also, if it's not your style to go, into the streets and roll your sleeves up and get dirty, but you have programming skills or whatever that is, like there's just different ways of getting involved. And so the H360.ai is the if someone's interested in learning more about it, but trying to like really de-siloize and make more efficient uses of resources, suggesting collaborations and so forth is really the goal.
You were kind of talking about that yesterday about the open source playbook and sharing that, and it just makes a lot of sense. That you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but you can really empower people to hit the ground running and cover some new ground.
Yeah, that conversation yesterday is actually sprungboard into that whole concept of the open source sustainability playbook. There's now there's been a bunch of follow up after that. They're keen to make that happen. So we're aggregating in another roundtable with a bunch of people that are leaders in the hospitality and travel space to see if we can make that a more sustainable and less of a footprint industry.
Yeah,
I loved that. I loved that the visionaries, the business owners and leaders that you had there, especially in the hotel, the hotel industry, and they talked about airplane travel as well, right? So they think about single-use plastics and how often that stuff is used. Or actually, you mentioned that. Actually, you noticed it's one thing that you noticed with your perspective changed. Anywhere you go and you see those single-use plastics, and you think that's going into a landfill and it's not going to break down. But it's something that had you not really sort of educated yourself about some of that, it just sort of gets beyond the or it's not on your radar. And so
yeah, I mean, I've learned a lot about that in the last 2 years. In large part thanks to a fellow named Dave Ford and the Ocean Plastics Leadership Summit that he invited us to help design and curate and kind of orchestrate the Impact Lab sprints on. For years and years and years, we've been sending these massive boats of plastics and trash over to China, thinking that they're actually disposing of it somehow, and they're not. They've just been dumping it into these rivers that end up going out in the ocean. All that plastic is now grinding up into these almost invisible microplastics, which are now being found in the fish and food streams, and even as of recent in the mountain streams of Montana and Colorado and Canada. And so suddenly it's a real health crisis. And so, there's lots of different grades of plastic, and there's a small inflection point of trying to figure out we don't need the thing that can last for 4,000 years to cover the apple that lasts a week.
Right.
Let's just use a different kind of plastic for that's more biodegradable and water soluble. So there's a ton to be learned there still, but there's global. You can go to opln.org and see kind of the results of that summit that turned into this network, which is now built into a series of treaty dialogues that's going to be presented to the UN next February.
Okay.
And I'm hopeful that there will be a plastics treaty, because if we're not heading that off, it's going to be a real shitstorm soon.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, working just in your own sort of geocentric area, right? It's not making any impact out in the world if or any other place is not taking it as seriously as we do, right? So I like the idea of not having to recreate the wheel. You've got the experts at a global level. A treaty is certainly going to be great, and one of those opportunities for them to spread knowledge worldwide. Just knowledge, beyond ignorance is so key, right? I mean, people educate themselves to a point if it suits them. I know when An Inconvenient Truth came out, when Al Gore came out with that movie and talked a lot about global warming and the impact of climate, it was on people's radar for a bit. And while it became important for quite a few people, I know that people kind of became blind to a lot of that stuff again. So he came out with a second movie, and it's almost like people, they get excited about something for a little bit, and then their interest wanes, right? So the more you can kind of, and I don't want to say bombard people with it, but at least find ways for them to feel like they can make a contribution or an impact in ways a lot of people don't want to be inconvenienced, right? They don't like to have to think about change, but if they can make tiny, small, incremental changes, it's huge. Because 7 billion people on the planet, doing one little thing can certainly make a change, right?
Yeah, and there's a real empathy crisis in the world. We sat and watched the news. Oh, I'm so sorry that COVID's happening to that country over there. Well, when it starts to impact your backyard and people you love and family members, suddenly you care.
Yeah.
And, we did a global living room earlier today. We have one the last Thursday of every month, and it was featuring Guto Requena, who's a Brazilian artist. And his whole, he's an architect first and foremost by trade, but everything he does is how to put more empathy and love out in the world. the buildings, the installations, like it's stunning work. And the session that we had earlier today was like so powerful. I mean, everyone on the call was like tears in their eyes. But when we're talking about what are the vehicles and ways in which we can try to accelerate more empathy and love in the world, and one of those ways is travel, is expanding your worldview, is going to visit places that at one point in time felt so far away that they don't really have anything to do with you. But when you start, the more kind of globalized we've become and the more places we visit, we start to recognize like we're all sharing this living room. That's you hear this all the time with like astronauts that go to space and turn around and look back and they're like, there are no boundaries necessarily. There's no countries. This is like one living room that we share. And if we could all get that perspective, I think we could be moving forward a lot faster.
I'm one of the organizations that I found a couple of years ago, and I think it's a real key thing for people that I try to let know now that COVID, hopefully, people getting vaccinated, hopefully if we can get to a point where travel becomes more feasible and healthy. I know a lot of people are already starting to make vacation plans. And one of the things I was surprised by, the organization Pack for a Purpose, when my band was traveling and we were playing some shows in the Dominican Republic, and people would go over for these big festivals, week-long events, but you stay at a resort, right? So if you go to these places and you hang out at the resort, that's not expanding your worldview. You're just back in your same tribe, with these fences up. And I was grateful that the band New Shoes, Valerie Day and her husband, John, every place they tour, they contact a representative from Pack for a Purpose, and they go into that community outside these areas and find a way that they can help. A lot of them are education-based. And so outside Punta Cana in Dominican Republic, they had just gotten hit with hurricanes. They lost a ton of their livestock. The schools, most of the schools had no electricity. So we just brought school supplies. And we went out and we checked out these schools, and they were so grateful. They were crying for ballpoint pens. When we gave these binders, there were a lot of tourists and people that were attending this festival that had never seen that kind of poverty. And even just being able to donate a day and get that perspective, to me, was so fulfilling, right? To be able to, okay, now that I know that that's there in Punta Cana, then I know that Haitian immigrants are also dealing with this. Or you go to Mexico, right, and you see like these impoverished areas right outside those resorts, like 10 feet from the walls of these resorts. If people could just and see how fortunate we are in so many ways. And even it's easy to think about how difficult our lives have been impacted by COVID until you look at how other people's lives have been impacted, and you think, okay, I have no complaints here. And if you feel overwhelmed about it, that you don't know how to make a difference, there are organizations that you talked about, that the wheel has already been created in some ways, especially, like I mentioned, Pack for a Purpose was a great opportunity that I didn't know about until they brought it up. But, I think that there are so many causes. You mentioned an empathy crisis. I think, if there was an opportunity to develop an understanding about how important it is to be empathetic to other people's plights, the pandemic was the right place for it. I think for me, if there's a silver lining in the pandemic, it's really recognizing that you can slow down and see how everybody, not one person on the planet was not, every person on the planet was affected by the pandemic, right? And not all of them were positive. I mean, most people were negatively impacted. Maybe some industries benefited, but I think a reset and a reframe was your idea of reframe was great. Ken is one of those guys that he and I have gotten to know each other more over the last few years than we ever did before. And that the real life superhero talent that he has, I don't think he even realized how gifted he was. He's been doing some writing, it's personal writing, but he's got a gift for expression. And while he's an incredible photographer and musician, he also and video producer, he's got this gift of writing, and I could see bringing people together, changing the world there. I'm trying to encourage him to use that super talent elsewhere. I think.
Well, I want to piggyback on that because Ken has had a bigger impact on me than he probably knows. When we were in film school together, I completely looked up to you and the work that you did. I remember every time you would create something, I was just like, fuck, that is really real art. And I was always really blown away by your talent. And then we had lunch one day and you recommended a book, and you recommended it with caution. And you said, this book had a big impact on me, but it could go either way. And it was The Fountainhead.
Oh,
and that book did have a big impact on me. I mean, it had like a major kind of, that, and then Atlas Shrugged. And, there are metaphors that were in that book that completely set my brain into high gear. And the Atlas Shrugged of like the idea of almost kind of, kidnapping this composer and the architect and all these archetypes in the world and like collecting them together into the mountains of Colorado. Well, guess what? I mean, that's what I've been doing for 18 years with Hatch, Montana. And thinking about that one day, I was like, God, it feels like I've like manifested Atlas Shrugged a little bit, and I have you to thank for that.
Well, wow, thanks. I was wondering about that because I sort of remember something in the back of my head, like maybe we talked about that at one point. So this is kind of, this really brings some things together. But yeah, that was, I think my first semester of college, I was probably a D student. And then I went off and worked in the carnival and read The Fountainhead. And I came back and I was like, not straight A's, but pretty close, So there's some kind of fire in that book, that just, I think the artistic manifesto, or just kind of empowers you to go against the current, if the current isn't, I don't know, if it's not going the way that it should or something. Of course, I think I sort of abused that, and I kind of used it against some conventional wisdom that is correct, So that's probably why I was cautioning you, because I guess that kind of leads right into this thing about the superheroes. So while we were in film school together, and by the way, I was always, I've always been really jealous of you, and even back to grade school, but in high school, especially when you came back, and we were different people than we were in grade school. And then we got to film school, and we got to do all this fun creative stuff together, and I got to see more of you, and that was great. And just kind of, film school is great that way. You can just kind of make what you want and get as artistic as you want. But the thing was that, and I promise this relates to the topic here, but so I had, when I was just like all about filmmaking and music, like when we were all hanging out together in college, I had a son that was living over in Billings, and I couldn't really, I was having a hard time getting along with his mom, and it just wasn't, it was really complicated to be able to see him. And as a result, well, not as a result, I just made a decision that I was going to try to be this superhero in film, right? It's like now or never, And so I just like put everything I had into it. And Yarrow and I got to do some really cool animation together and some other projects. And I just had a ball. Film school was the best. And so I did feel like a superhero, but it was like I was neglecting the nest, I was, I think that's maybe a common thing that people fall into sometimes. Like I remember giving a ride to a drummer from this really famous 80s band. Kevin knows who I'm talking about. I don't want to out him, but I was giving him a ride here in town from the Holiday Inn to somewhere else. And I was like, how do you do it? Like, how do you get your beats on the radio that I grew up with? And he's like, well, I just basically, that's all I did. I put that above everything else, my family, my kids, everything. That's all I did. And I just think, I love what Hatch is about, and the superhero, we all need that, we need to stretch, we need to grow, we need to try to solve some of these problems in our neighborhood and around the world. But I think the risk and this is not with Hatch, this is just in life, that I think the risk is that, you know, we're a public superhero, and in our nest, you know, like I neglected my son, you know? So at some point I sort of woke up to that, and I was just like, wait, I'm not being a superhero here. In fact, I'm sort of, you know, eroding on the inside, you know? And then you know, life's like that. You just get to learn how to show up and be a stretch in lots of different ways. And it's, that's a hard realization, but I don't know. I don't know if that advances the conversation, but that's something I've been thinking about, you know?
I'll jump in there for a second. My audio's echoing, sorry. Ken, you know, the conversation we had when I talked about having some regrets that I did put my family second in my pursuit. And I remember that conversation also covered Yarrow going after it, going to LA and trying to accomplish, you know, accomplish his dreams without any fear, right? And going out fearless and throwing caution to the wind almost, and being vulnerable that way. It's also developing an idea of who you are, right? You're at that point, I don't know I don't want to speak for you, Yarrow, but for me, the identity that I thought I embodied is different today than it was then. And so I tried to be as present as I could for my kids. I certainly neglected the connectivity with my wife at that point. And she was also accommodating that so much because she knew how important it was to me. You mentioned the risk, and I heard Yarrow talk about this in the podcast, or maybe it was in the Summit for Sustainability. But somebody asked Yarrow a question about like taking on the world's problems. I'm so guilty of having tried to control not only my environment, but at one point, you know, if I figured I could fix the homeless epidemic on my own, or, you know, solve, you know, addiction issues and people around me, or, you know, fix climate change, I mean, I would have assumed responsibility for all of it because I was a control freak. And I am empathetic to a lot of different causes, but at the same time, it burned me out. You know, and so Yarrow mentioned not being productive. He said, you know, if I took on everything from every place, yeah, then I would burn out. And maybe I'm paraphrasing what you said, Yarrow, but I was glad to hear you say it because, you know, I viewed you as one of those guys that said, all right, I can take it all on, throw it all on me, and I'll just carry it on this big, broad set of shoulders, you know? But I think as humans, you know, we've all got a breaking point. Understanding where our identity lies in that, and seeing where our role is in that, the synergistic soup that we have, you know, to make change. That's something that I've just been this year. You know, at 50, it's crazy to recognize that to be a cog in the wheel to really make change, you know, rather than try to be the wheel, is what was most important and most powerful and impactful. And I'm no less of a person because I can't do it all, right?
Amen. Yeah, I mean, I hate to keep sounding repetitive, but like, how do you say the world start with where you are? There's so many different meanings to that for me, and like they've continued to like reveal themselves to me over time. And at a point in which you recognize that you have nothing left in the tank, that's when you need to like pay attention to what's happening here. You know, you're not nurturing yourself, you're not taking care of yourself, you're not being healthy, you're not taking care of the people around you, you're not being present, and all of that. You know, even when we're bringing, you know, some of the most on paper successful people in the world together in the ecosystem of Hatch, in the solitude of 4 days in the mountains, you know, through some of the exercises that we facilitate, we crack people open, and they all have this realization that, you know, Hatch isn't, you know, by day 3, there's this kind of aha moment that Hatch is a verb, and that it's happening, and that even though they've, you know, accomplished all these things, there is this real inner vulnerability that needs to be tended to. And a lot of that is, you know, just human development around kind of Maslow's hierarchy, and like there's the self, and you can kind of move out to community, world, and beyond. But you know, I can barely watch the news because it's always such bad news, and that it feels like anything you're doing is not really moving the needle. And that's kind of exhausting. It feels like what's the point, right? Like why
futility? Yeah.
What am I doing that makes a difference? Like I should just be hanging out by a river somewhere. So I go through the little ebbs and flows of that. I think COVID gave that pause for a lot of people. We ended up kind of reinventing everything that we were doing really quickly. Last year became almost the busiest year I've had in 17 years of Hatch, because we really just stepped forward to lead with service and community, and kind of threw any of like notion or concern of revenue models out the window. We're like, let's just pop up these places to give people a place to congregate and collectively sense make and hear perspectives from different cultures, and it became a real place of solace. But even in that dead sprint of us creating programming for this, you know, every week, 2 times a week, by the time November came around, I was like out of gas, you know, and just it comes in cycles, right? I think that the whole metaphor of seasons is that it's like planting seeds, harvesting, hibernating, spring, you know, happens again. It's like that whole metaphor of the seasons is I think how we live our lives. But you know, you said something. Just one more thing I'll just mention is just how much you know, youth is wasted on the young. The energy that we have when we were, you know, 20, 25, 30, 35, the ignorance of not knowing that you can't do something, so you just go do it. Like all that stuff, like the pushing the plane off the mountain and building the wings on the way down, and that, you know, lack of fear for failing, all that stuff is so valuable. And as we get older, we start to lose some of that. And the other part is like, I wouldn't trade it, because the wisdom and like even like gentleness that I've learned in the last 10 years, that a lot of it has come from the people that I surround myself with and continue to learn from. You know, at one point I would think that I would just keep getting like smarter and smarter and smarter, and you know, the more you know you don't know, right? It's just becoming just a lifelong student.
Oh yeah, no, I think that's beautiful. The global perspective is great. I've got Claudia Odenthal on the chat here saying the world could use a few more guys like you. Claudia is this incredible gal in Bonn, Germany that I met on tour. She's always very I guess she contributes a different perspective every time I do these chats, but she's one of those people that has changed her community in a big way, and I love seeing it. You know, she uses social media for a great purpose to sort of better her community. So I'm glad it's for staying up late in Germany.
Which city in Germany?
She's in Bonn, Germany.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. She actually, I met her in London. She came to do my hair in London when I was on tour, and she saw that I was missing some purple, and so she brought all of her stuff from our salon and you know, did me up proper in London. So
awesome.
Yeah. You know, there was I know that changing the world is exhausting. You talked about the oxygen mask analogy. You know, when you mentioned that in the podcast, I think that was a great one. You know, put your own oxygen mask on first in order to be able to help save everybody else in the plane going down. I was going to talk about plane first of all. I want to know about the Richard Branson connection, and then we could talk about some guilty pleasures, because I ask everybody on my show. Oftentimes we're talking to musician contemporaries when I'm out touring, and I like to know somebody that knows Yarrow. So we'll get to Richard in a second. People that think they know Yarrow, what would they be surprised to know about you? What's a guilty pleasure of yours?
Well, it's ever evolving.
Yeah.
I mean, I've become very fond of quiet time.
Yeah.
That's not something that was in my DNA for a really long time. But like this last year of kind of nesting in Montana, like I was pretty happy. I was flying all over the place for the last 5 years, and just to kind of slow down and, you know, sit and watch grass move in the wind. It's like it's been real lovely to be here. Guilty pleasure. I mean, I like good food.
Yeah.
I like cooking. I like mezcal. It's very artisan. It's like the only slow cooked food in the form of a beverage. And I'm just really thirsty for knowing amazing human beings and learning more.
I love that. Yeah, it's the biggest reason that this podcast has been so involved for me during the pandemic. I did it because we had time off, and we were having conversations with the bandmates about what we're going to do in this next 2 or 3 months that the pandemic might go on, right? Which is now turned into 186 shows, and I've gotten to meet incredibly beautiful humans, people that I thought I knew well. I got to get to a different depth. I love that people can be vulnerable and open. You know, so tell me about the Richard Branson. How did that happen?
So a friend of mine, Huntley Ritter, became a producer for Branson, and Huntley was in the very early days of Hatch. And so, you know, I moved to LA. I went there with kind of the eye on directing, and I was directing for a while. I was kind of like making that happen. Came back, started Hatch, and for 14 of the 17 and a half years, there wasn't any paid staff, including myself. So the whole thing was just 100% volunteer driven. And so for, you know, a while, I was like, that was a kind of a point of pride. I was like really proud of ourselves at but I'm also like patchworking together all the sponsorships, and, you know, we were covering everyone's cost to come. You couldn't buy a ticket to, you know, like, no, this is a gift for being amazing. Thank you for the work you're doing in the world. And people were like, how do you even make that happen? And then someone was like, you know, look, we need you to do what you do really well, which is make connections. You know, you see where people need to meet and you make those things happen. We don't need you out fundraising all the time. And so that's when I started shifting the model, like, okay, cover your costs. You know, everything's, you know, 3 meals a day, da da da. That whole time I was making my living as a director for the first 14 years of Hatch. And for half of that was for Richard Branson's production company through the introduction from Huntley. And so we got to fly down to Necker Island and film him there. We got to fly to Dallas and do some, you know, promo work on Virgin stuff for him there. And I mean, the guy was, he's iconic, but in person, he's just such a great human being. He's so authentic. He's just such a real dude that, you know, I felt like we had known each other for a while. And so I've been working a little bit with his foundation, Virgin Unite, and putting a couple of things together that for the Hatch. You know, one of the interesting things that happened for the COVID and the pandemic was that through, you know, the many years of me and, you know, pushing kind of the boulder up the mountain on, you know, just within the trench of Hatch, one of the things that, you know, there's a metaphor that I use during the Superdudes days. It's like when you're trying to do something audacious and bold, and, you know, you got the weight of this, like the Sisyphus boulder, you're pushing up the mountain, you feel like you're the only one doing that. And then when you realize there's someone one trench over also pushing the boulder up, and another trench over, and another trench over, and another trench over, suddenly there's this kind of unified collective strength giving that, and you know, and we find it now, like with even like CEOs, you put 8 CEOs in a circle and everyone is trying to solve something in their life, and 9 times out of 10 someone in that circle has solved it and can help you solve it for you, whether they're in your same industry or not. And there's all sorts of peer-to-peer mentor groups, whether it's, you know, like, you know, AA to tribal circles to, I mean, on and on and on, right? There's like peer-to-peer networks of, you know, peer-to-peer mentoring is really the modern day Kiva. It's the way that we can solve challenges. So anyway, Through, I just kind of realized at a certain point in time that I was becoming less and less in love with being on set. All I could think about was the work that we were doing at Hatch, because I felt like it just had more importance. And the more I'm learning about conscious consumerism, and over here I'm like my split consumerism and branded content and customers and so forth. And suddenly it was just like, felt like it was a bit of a tug of war. And so I also recognized that I was doing two things half as well as I could do one thing really well. And so just kind of finally having the humility to realize that it was time to let go of one of those things. And rather than me championing myself as this, creative and this director, I just thought that it was time to really help others be that. If I'm not satisfied being on a set where it used to be this kind of this dream of mine,
Yeah.
I'm taking up space, right? I'm like taking someone's job who is the person that really wants to be there. And so get out of the way and go help someone else who wants to be in that position. And so I've kind of drawn a hard line. It's been kind of handing those recommendations and requests off to other creators. But right now my heart is really in Hatch and H360, this tech platform. But even that, I want to just get it spun up to the point where I'm just handing it out to someone else to run, and just continue to really support education, equity, environment, empowerment, in solving these challenges.
What do you feel like is the biggest challenge for you? And my thought leading up to this podcast was, I wish the entire planet could listen to Yarrow and get these ideas together, because I think if 1 billion people knew that they could connect with other superheroes in order to solve the world's problems, and have Yarrow as the conduit to be able to do that, then it'd be great. So I don't have 1 billion people yet in my viewership. What do you feel like is the biggest challenge in terms of just getting the awareness out there, maybe getting more mobility out of this?
What is the biggest challenge for me, or what is the biggest challenge for our world?
Okay. As you look at Hatch and you think, okay, we've gone to several different countries, we're all over the world now, we've got amazing visionaries. If we just had X, Y, or Z, then we could do this much more.
Yeah, money.
Yeah.
Like I always really kind of cringe when I ask that question and someone gives me that answer.
No.
But the bottom line is, I mean, for me, it's staff and infrastructure, and it's just powering programs, and like we've been prototyping some really cool programs. One of them is called the Virtual Impact Labs. So we spun that up last year. We had 160 people from 12 countries and 34 states across the U.S. formed 20 teams virtually. We met for 90 minutes a week for 10 weeks. And on the backside of that, there were 18 projects that came to life, and they're incredible. And they're still, 2/3 of them are like taking flight. One of them ended up becoming a voter mobilization initiative called No Vote Left Behind. We brought in Alec Baldwin and Reggie Watts and Nina Turner and Aloe Black, and we aggregated 25 million audience reach through that initiative. Hatch has always been really kind of small and boutique, and that's the first time that we'd ever been playing on that kind of a impressions and KPI playing field. And so suddenly I'm like, oh geez, well, what are the opportunities here? And so one of those opportunities was to take that model, the format of Impact Labs, and repackage it as Global Classroom, because one of the challenges we mentioned earlier was just like the lack of worldview expansion. And it happens significantly if you're in a school that's 100% white in Montana, or 100% Latin in a borough in Los Angeles, or 100% African American in a school in Chicago. If any of those kids get to a college campus and they're kind of faced with these other ethnicities, they don't really know how to navigate that. And so the Global Classroom is a way to stitch together these expanded worldviews. So this year we had schools in Montana and inner city Philadelphia meeting together on a weekly basis for 12 weeks to co-create solutions that they had to identify as needs in their own communities, and then solutions for those needs. So they got to understand how a different community worked. They got to co-create this barn raising. So that's a project I would like to see scaled quickly, and that's going to require some funding, right?
Yeah.
And so these things that we're trying out, it's like, we're not necessarily on the radar for MacArthur Foundation and Ford Foundation and some of these like significant, larger foundations. We're still kind of patchworking together these like smaller foundations, and we have a lot of volunteer hours. And so, really it's like I'm on a path right now of trying to figure out where we're missing, because if it's storytelling, so we hired a person finally to like really track impact. Now we can tell the story on that impact. That takes 2 years of a cycle to be able to show what the impact is. It's another reason why we started building out the H360 platform, was because as you're raising your hand to get involved in a cause, all that stuff starts to tally up. So we're in conversations with companies like SAP that have 110,000 employees. They want to kick out end of your ESG impact report. So with this platform, this next generation of employees are so purpose and impact driven. Like if you don't have purpose and impact on ramps in your company, you're going to lose out on this this next generation of talent. And so it's becoming a competitive landscape to create those pathways for impact. So this platform would also allow your employee base to fill out your profile and then to get automatically brought to you a queue of programs that you might be interested in. Like, hey, Ken, I know that you're passionate about X, Y, and Z, and you have these skill sets. It matches you up to a bunch of different potential things that you could, and at the end of the year, the company can kick out a report and show that they've made 40,000 hours of volunteer, on areas of equity, or toward homelessness, or toward, climate change and so forth. So anyway, I mean, to answer your question, like PR and press is another one of those things, because that leads to people hearing about your initiatives, and they're like, hey, I know someone that's passionate about funding something like that. And so, there's a lot of different kind of things that Hatch needs to expand. We're in a really, for being an 18-year-old program, I feel like we're still in startup mode, because we just sort of put a business lens on it like 3 years ago. And I was like, okay, I'm going to stop taking a salary from, Richard Branson's company and these other, consulting gigs I had, and really just drill in on Hatch, which meant I had to step off a cliff without there being a cloud there, and figure out how I was going to build a business around it so that I could pay myself, so that I could have a mortgage and do so for other staff members. And so we built out a strategic plan. We're 3 years into that strategic plan. One of those years was COVID, so it got kind of thrown out the window. And we're kind of retooling now what the original strategic plan was, with in-person gatherings and convenings, and the hybrid of cool things like this, and the global classroom, Clubhouse app. We're on that as well. So we're also launching something called Portals, which is anybody could sign up, and it's really around kind of tapping into that inner purpose, perspective, North Star, your Ikigai, like kind of untapping that your inner superpowers. So those are a series of workshops that we're releasing in a month.
If somebody wanted, if they were listening to this entire cast, when they go back on YouTube and they listen to this, how would they find out about all these different opportunities? How would they find out about these workshops and the apps and the programs?
Hatchexperience.org is the kind of the main hub.
That's the hub. All right.
And in that we're actually putting up a new homepage in the next day or two. We've been working on it for a couple months. The mission and programs have kind of outgrown what's currently presented. And so you'll see like a much cleaner version of what the programs are, and then kind of how you can plug in, like, I'm a X, Y, and Z. Oh, that's for here. I'm an educator. I'm a private citizen. I'm looking to volunteer and get involved. Like, I'm a leader of a company. Like, there'll just be more of a user's journey, kind of hero's journey, so to speak.
I love that. You seem to be one of those guys that has been asked a million times, what's Hatch all about? What's 360 all about? you've got a very concise and detailed answer immediately, which is again,
Except that it's always different.
well, but at least it paints the picture clearly, which is great. I was just gonna, pie in the sky. All right, so you and the organizations you've worked with have solved all the world's problems, and and that angel investor that helped solve those problems said, Yarrow, I'm going to give you $1 billion to do what with it. What would you like? What would Yarrow go back to directing and doing some creative film work, or what would you do to use that investor's money? All the problems are solved.
I'd probably start an accelerator / incubator for good ideas that improve the world, and with a focus on BIPOC, people of color, marginalized communities, founders, female founders. There's a lot of underrepresented voices that need to be have a microphone and a seat at the table and get their vision seen. I mean, the stats are crazy on, the percentage of white male CEOs. And but I mean, if all the world's problems are solved, I guess that one would already been solved.
Right.
But it'd probably be an incubator to foster ideas that continue to improve humanity.
Man, it's so much unselfishness and so much generosity. I love it. I do, man. I
mean, what am I going to do with $1 billion?
Yeah.
I can't spend that in my lifetime.
Isn't it funny that, perspectives change, right? I mean, my oldest that you saw here in the chat, Caleb, he's a drummer and he's a hip hop artist. I used to rehearse at this place in Lake Oswego, this affluent area outside of Portland that, a billionaire owned this property. He let us come and use his gymnasium first and then his pool house. And when we first loaded in, my son helped me move my drums in. And the guy landed with his helicopter on the property. And my son said, Dad, we've got to buy a Powerball ticket. And I said, man, we had Powerball. There's no way we'd live in a place like this. This is ridiculous. This guy and his 14-year-old kid live here, right? It's a 30,000 square foot home in a 100-acre place. And every day I would have a hard time going to sleep, in a place like that. Just, some people can make good use of that space, but for me, no. I had just heard from that son that Elon Musk sold all of his possessions to put into his ventures, right? And just rents an apartment now and has his Teslas and got rid of all those earthly possessions just because he wanted to make a difference in that. So if you're listening, Elon, we need some funding behind the Hatch project, so you've got other vested interests. There are angel investors out there that could certainly help you make that thing happen. And I know it's great to see you as a conduit here. All right. Did you want me to post this one?
Yeah. There's a graphic that shows Jeff Skoll's wealth to scale. And when you start to look at, I think there was 500 billionaires that grew $30 trillion of wealth last year.
Okay.
And then they're on the flip side, another 6 million people became homeless. And the redistribution should happen is, the problems could be solved. There just needs to be a reallocation of where some of the concentration of wealth. There's something. If Jeff, I think there was a stat around. I'm probably gonna get this wrong, but so I have to Google it to fact check me. But if Jeff Skoll gave $5 million to every single person in the world, he'd still have like 20 billion left.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Wow. And so, on that graphic of showing wealth to scale, you can see it's like you keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. You're like, oh, this is every single person in the U.S. healthcare paid for the next 10 years. And you keep scrolling and scrolling. It's like, perspective, people. Come on, we really need.
Let's see. I was going to try and share that on here as well because I think you talked about it on the podcast, and I think until people actually get to see that perspective, it doesn't even make sense. So let me try here. Let's see if I can share this up.
Kevin, if you got that 30,000 foot house, how many drum kits could you put in that?
How many would you need?
Right.
You can only play it one at a time, right? So
you got a collection, as I recall, but
You know what? For my entire life, I had one drum kit until a couple years ago. I have an amazing uncle who's a jazz drummer in Chicago. When he retired in his 80s, I got his 1956 Gretsch that I will never play. It's a beautiful collector's item, and it's now become, you know, more of a piece of art in my home. And you know, I've got a couple sets that are just donations, you know. But yeah, I was going to try and share that here. But folks, if you can see that link, Yarrow pointed to here. I'll put it in the chat. It's pretty remarkable and a little bit sickening.
You can also Google Jeff Skoll's wealth shown to scale.
Okay. Yeah.
So just real quick, what would you guys do with $1 billion?
Again?
Not really. Let's see. I'll get back to you.
Well, yeah, while you're thinking about it, I will tell you, there was when I moved to Portland, I will admit, you know, my aspirations were selfish, right? I wanted to be a rock star. I wanted to play on the biggest stages, play with the biggest artists, certainly make a lot of money, but more importantly, I wanted the attention. And I didn't recognize until last year, you know, that having to step away, I recognized the identity crisis that was part of that. I love the people that I meet on the road more than anything, you know, whether it be the bands or people that we meet on the road. I love the cultures. I love the countries we visit. And that's what I miss more than, you know, the attention, for sure. I miss the connectivity. And when I first moved to Portland and I signed a deal with a band, our hope was that we could provide a nonprofit that could provide healthcare for musicians, because every musician we knew was broke. And we had these great aspirations about doing, you know, social causes. And gosh, I met a guy, and I don't want to. Now there's a pretty negative taint. He's horribly in legal trouble, but he's a PETA spokesperson. He'd done a lot for animal rights, and I really loved his causes. And so we were working together a little bit on this partnership, and I told him, I said, there's so much more we could do with this, you know, playing off the idea of some things that, boy, it's tough to, without pinpointing exactly what it was. Anyway, we had an idea to make a lot of money for his cause. And then after we got it set up, he said, well, you can donate it to those causes, and I need to make money. And I realized, okay, so that guy wasn't going to walk the walk. And people that had these social cause ideas maybe weren't going to actualize those things. When I was in that band and we signed a deal, I saw that not everybody was on the same page with those things. So I had time where I was really focused on my own interests and my own aspirations. And then you have children, completely changes perspective. You know, you realize that everything you fought to acquire for yourself doesn't matter anymore. Now everything is about your kids. Now my kids are older, 19, 22, and all I want to do is get out to connect with these communities that matter to me and that I haven't yet met. I'm selling my home. I'm getting a sprinter or something like that, and make those connections again. I missed so much this last year that that was my identity. It wasn't the rock star or the guy that wanted the attention. It was that I need people. I need connection. And so that's inside it. It's a superhero part, but I could do that a lot easier with $1 billion. You know, I could actually have a better solar and higher Wi-Fi capabilities, you know, and a better sprinter if I'm actually traveling the world, and make the community better that I got into, you know. So there's some selfishness there, but I do feel like I could make an impact, you know, in each of those places that I touched. So, I mean,
I'm bummed I missed it when you were in Montana.
Well, I'll be back.
I know.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm going to drop one more link in here. This is called the Armory of Harmony.
Okay.
It's a friend of mine that a hatcher that melts down confiscated guns and ammunition to create musical instruments.
Wow. Oh my God, are you kidding me? I love it. That's so good. Wow. I would imagine that this is not a Montanan, is it?
No.
Yeah, I was gonna say. don't. You might have a hard time selling that one in Montana from a lot of the Montanans I knew.
Outside of Bozeman, for sure.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And there was one more link I wanted to share too, just in case anybody was really actively interested in learning a little bit more about homelessness and Mark Brand. It's a Better Life Foundation. .us. So I just got that one in too.
Oh, cool. Okay.
He's such a powerhouse. We'd love to see.
You know, I love this. We believe every individual should have access to a better life, starting with food security. We're working to secure upward mobility for those living in the margins. You know, I will tell you, I see that Mike Klaus, you're here in the chat group. Mike is another one of those guys. He's a Portlander who really contributes a lot to his community, and I'm glad to see that he's hitting these links and chiming in. You know, eventually, I'd like to get enough eyeballs on this thing that some of those angel investors can get out there and get behind Hatch, and you know, the rebranding of this channel and the remarketing of it, I think is definitely going to make some impact. That I'm really grateful to have gotten to know more about what you're offering. You know, Madeline raised a good kid, man. I know that it was not easy for you guys, and I'm proud of her. You know, my dad has glowing memories of working with your mom, and you know, I just and Ken's video disappeared again as well, but getting to know Ken the last couple of years is it blows my mind. You know, he works so much with Bozeman community to, you know, empower a lot of people that have been challenged with some adversarial hurdles. There you're back again. I don't know if you heard that, but you know, Ken, you know, I'm very grateful, you know, to have gotten to know you more. Yarrow, when Ken and I were in school in drumming, wait, I need to put a Better Life out here. When we were in the music scene, I was so envious of Ken that we were almost bitter rivals.
We were, because I was jealous of him too.
Yeah, it's
more of a rocker.
Had I known, you know, what a compassionate and beautiful mind you had, I think we could have probably, you know, done a few more things then. But I'm grateful that you know, to have it now. So there's a reason. You know, I think it took 50 years of maturation to get to this point that we can, you know, cultivate change. So Yarrow, and I am so excited to be able to reconnect with you. I'm so happy to see what you're doing. And for those of you, if you're out there in the chat, hit subscribe, go back to the beginning, watch this, go to hatchexperience.org. Yarrow, there are TEDx chats in the bottom of the profile of Yarrow's page there. Some great podcasts, and I would say, if you can, go out there and dig up all these resources that he's provided links to, because it not only will it educate you, but I think you can spread that word and hopefully make an impact on your community, make this world a better place. And it, you know what, I actually just found the one that you guys, I think you pointed out, Kiss the Ground on Netflix as well, right? Was that one of yours? Yeah, not here, but yesterday. Yeah, so that one's on my. That's another documentary that activists unpack the ways in which the Earth's soil may be the key to combating climate change and preserving the planet, starring Woody Harrelson. So, cool. Yeah. So if you're Netflixing and chilling, watch that one too. Thank you, Mike.
Kevin, thank you so much for having me. This has been a pleasure.
It's a pleasure and an honor. Ken Glenn, thank you so much for letting me talk all over top of you.
Oh, of course. Thanks for having me, and really good to reconnect with both of you guys, but especially Yarrow. It's been a busy couple decades, hasn't it?
Yeah, seriously, we're overdue. I know.
Yeah.
Next time I'm there, but in the meantime, you guys go and find the best coffee houses in town, will you? And then find
All right,
you guys. Thanks so much. I appreciate you watching. I will be back here next on Tuesday. You know, Yarrow, one more thing I was just going to say. Your global classroom. There's a wonderful. There was a gal whose children lost their music program locally in Beaverton, Oregon. As you know, the funding gets cut from music programs all the time. she came up with an organization that's now a 501c3 called Music Workshop, edu.org. Music Workshop has been able to provide music education to every state in the union, I think over 75 countries, and pretty much every continent except Antarctica. And I think they have over 1 million students being taught with this music program right now, where all of these music programs have been cut. But it's amazing. It's all free for these schools to be able to teach this program. So she's going to be a guest of mine in 2 weeks, and I can't wait to tell her about Hatch, because I think global classroom, I think, is certainly the next way to be able to open people's eyes to, how important it is to accept and work together, synergistically. So thanks again, guys.
Well, yeah. I'd love to meet her, so you can make an intro.
Okay, you got it. Absolutely. Thank you guys so much. Have a beautiful day, wonderful weekend. Enjoy that gorgeous weather.
Yeah.
Rock on. All right. Take care, guys.
Take care.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Peace.
Good job.